Hey everyone, I wanted to make a video on Angular 1.5 component binding. I couldn't find anything really that helped explain the function binding part of it, so I figured I would make a video. Anything I'm doing here you can find online. I'm used to using a Mac, I'm using Windows, it doesn't matter. You could start this by using your editor and making a new folder and starting your project, but I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to make directory and call it Angular bindings. So I made that, and now I'm using Visual Studio Code, and so I'm going to open Visual Studio Code by doing that. Visual Studio Code is going to open this Angular bindings folder that I just created. So here we are. To start us out, I'm just going to make an index.html file and an app.js file. Visual Studio Code has a lot of cool shortcuts. This is one of them. Exclamation mark tab gives you just a basic HTML template. So here is our page. I have a plugin that allows me to open a default browser from here, and that is just open in browser. So if you search the marketplace for open in browser, you can get that. And if you don't want to, just copy your path and paste it in here, and now you're open. So back in Visual Studio Code, I need to add, first of all, I need to add this app.js. But then I also need to add Angular. Now I could bower and install this or npm install this and then do it from there. But especially when I'm developing, I find it easiest just to use the CDN for it, which is right here. If you search for hosted Angular or Angular hosted or whatever, it's this hosted libraries by Google. So go there, and it's this AngularJS snippet right here. And currently it's 1.6.4. I don't know what it'll be when you see this. So there. We now have Angular in the page. To use Angular, you can put it here, you can put it here, you can put it wherever you want. But just remember that to use Angular, this has to be in the element or on the element that you're using it. So if I usually put it here, but I'm going to put it here for right now. You can do ng-app or you can do data-ng-app, which is the more correct way to do it. XHTML compliant or something, I don't know. So do that, and this is what makes your app an Angular app. Now, if I go back here and I refresh, it still loads fine, but nothing really shows that it's an Angular app. So I always like to, when I'm first starting up an Angular app, do this. So it's got these double curly braces and then 5 + 5. This is just a JavaScript expression. And just to make sure this is hooked up correctly, this should not show up as angle bracket or curly brace 5 + 5 curly. It should show up as 10. So I saved this. I'm going to go back and refresh, and there it shows up as 10. It's actually, Angular is evaluating that and placing what it needs to. If this wasn't there and I tried to do that, it would just say 5 + 5. So our Angular application is working. So now what do we want to do? Let's go over here and start an Angular module. You can call this whatever you want. I usually just call them all of mine main app. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back here. And to be able to use a defined module, I do that. And I should be able to come over here and refresh, and no problems. That's 10, we're good. If I were to name this incorrectly, it would break. Yeah, see, I didn't use the right casing there, it broke, but we're using the right casing, we're great. So since this is a components thing, let's get rid of that. And we're going to go make a component. And it's pretty simple syntax. Component, let's call this one outer comp. So a component takes a string for a name, and comma, and then an object. This is camel cased, and this will come into play in a little bit, but start them out with lowercase, and then if you want to use like a two-word thing, it's going to become hyphened, but I'll show you that. Yeah, so there's camel cased. Anytime I start out a component, I generally I put three things in there by default. Bindings, which is an empty object right now. Controller, which is, I'm going to set it to an empty controller. And template. And I'm going to use backticks here, and that's so that I can do a multi-line template. So we're going to say H2, and we're going to say hello from the outer component. Save it. Now to use this component is fully functional now. To use it, we're going to take this and copy it. I'm going to have to change it. Come over here. We got rid of that 5 plus 5 thing. We're going to say outer comp, but instead of this capital C, we're going to do -C, and there. It's a convention that camel casing becomes dash and then lowercase for Angular components. So there it is. I think that's with directives too. But there. And if I come back here and I refresh, you should see hello from the outer component. And there it is. So our component is hooked up completely. Let's go ahead and copy this. And we're going to make one that's called inner comp. Over here, we're just going to copy this, paste it, inner component. Let's change these to 3 so that it's visibly different. And then we refresh, and there's hello from the inner component. So there's a really simple way to make a component. These don't really do much of anything except for just say hello from the component. So how do you make these more useful? Well, I'm going to show you something that I do on almost every controller or every component. I set this. Components have a default that makes control the alias for the controller. So inside the controller, I always set this variable control equal to this, because on the page, it's going to be $control. You can change that with controller as, but I wouldn't even worry about it. So you can say, one thing that I can say from experience is anything that you want to display on the page when it's loaded, wrap in this. This is an Angular function, on the controller. So basically, it evaluates whatever is in here before the page is fully loaded. So anything that I want evaluated before the page loads and displays, I put in here, or else it won't show up, most likely. So I'm going to say control.username equals Nick. I'm going to pass that. And here, I'm going to say username is control.username. Now, this will work. It'll just pass Nick into this. Yep, username is Nick. So that's all well and good, but it's not really getting any information. So real simple, I'll show you a string binding, and we're going to set that username to that. The @ symbol is the syntax for string binding in an Angular component. So instead of this, I want to say this, equals control.username, which this is a control variable. So this is actually, once it gets into here, it's going to be $control. So this should be this. If that is nothing, which it is nothing right now, I'm going to say Nick. And actually, I'm going to change this to NA, just so you can see that this is going to say username is NA. Username is NA. Great. That's what we wanted. It's not great, but that's what we wanted. So to set this variable, you're going to come out here to your outer component, and you're going to say username equals, and since we're using the string syntax or the string binding, we can just say Nick. And now it's going to change from username is NA to username is Nick. Now, if there's several different types here, this is the data binding. Instead of the @ symbol is a string, the less than symbol is data binding. If I tried that right now, this would not work. It would say NA because it says, no wait, this is not an object. Now if I wanted to wrap this like that, now it sees it as a string and I can say Nick again. Otherwise it thinks Nick is an object, which it is not. So I will change this back. I like to use string binding whenever I can, just because then you don't have to use those apostrophes, the quotations. So there's some simple string binding. Now let's do a little more complex stuff. Let's put this inner component in our outer component. That's actually why I called it this. So it looks like this right now, and we're not going to change that. How we do that is we're going to say that. Now when I refresh the page, it should look exactly like it does right now. There we go. Looks exactly the same, and that's because this outer component is now calling this inner component. Sweet. So let's do some function binding. This is the fun stuff. So we're going to say add name. And that's going to be the and symbol. And is the function binding key. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to make a function called add a name. So we've got a function called add a name. Over here in our template for our inner component, we're going to add an input field and a button. Yeah. So add name. And we're going to set this to ng model of control.new name. And we're going to new name. So this is now going to have a new name and add name, which doesn't do anything right now. First thing we're going to do is in this function we're going to say control.new name equals nothing. That's going to clear out that input every time we call this. When you click the button, it's going to call that control.add name. It's going to call this function every time you do this. So we can see this working now, and this should just clear out box. Should have. Add a name. Control.new name. I don't really know why this isn't working. I'm sure. Oh, no, that's not it. Control.add. Oh, it's because I didn't add that. There we go. I'm sure you knew that already, but there we go. Now if I say Nick, yeah, now it clears it out. So that doesn't do a whole lot for us, does it? Well, we're going to change that. So this is actually going to call this add name function. So first we're going to come up here and we're going to define a function here. And we're going to call this control.addName. Sure, why not? AddName equals function. And it's going to get a name. And we're going to say control.username equals name. So our username is now displaying right here, right? This should change. So we've got add name set up with name. Good. So now in this inner comp, here's where it gets fun. We're going to call this just like we would any other function, any other binding name, but instead of just passing a variable in or a string value in, we're going to pass this add name function in. And here's the thing that tripped me up. What we're going to pass in here, I'm going to put in name. This name is just an empty placeholder. So you can call this whatever you want. It doesn't have to relate to anything back here. Okay? Basically what this does is it sets this function right here as this. So whatever this is going to call, it's going to pass into here, and then this is going to pass into here. So, yeah. So we did that. Add name, name. So the last thing we have to do is to have this set that. So we are going to, inside this add a name, we're going to say control.addName. And this is going to look strange, but you pass it an object, and you need this exact name. Name. And this is where it happens. .new name. That's what you have to do. This in the called component has to equal this in the outer component. And now this should add names. This should change our name to that. So let's go see if this works. So this should change from Nick to Steve. There it is. Nick to Steve. So you can use this for so much, and you can pass functions this way, you can pass data this way, whatever you want. I just showed you a really simple way to do this. You can, here on the outer component, I'm going to say control.names equals a new list of names. Name. Oh yeah, no. We'll just say Nick. Great. And then down here, we'll put an HR. I'm doing this on the fly right now, so if this doesn't work out, I'm sorry. We'll say ng repeat equals name in control.names. Name. Let's see. And control. Oh. Okay, so now it's got Nick. What I can also do is I change the username. I can change the username, but I can also say names dot push push name. Now, whenever we add it, it will not only change that, but it will push that to that list of names. So, yeah. You changed that variable, you added this to that array of variables. Like I said, this is a super powerful thing, and now that I understand it, I love it, and I think I'll use it all over the place. But anyway, I think that's about all I've got for you. If you like the video, like it. This is my first tutorial, and I'm only doing this because I couldn't find any video tutorials that really explained function binding at all. But so the main things to remember are this in your template, this name that I have right here, doesn't have to equal anything on the back end. It just has to match up to this on the inner component when you call this. And that's all I got for you. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.